Now, the game Rat Quest, in its title, has two components: rats and the other part. Today, we're going to be talking about that second part. The game is designed to be as straightforward and as simple as possible while still retaining several degrees of what I might call standard RPG components. What I mean by that is there's presumed action, there are things to collect, a sort of like a generic fantasy setting, and attributes. I wouldn't call them classes, but the core idea was of the core idea of the design was to strip down what makes up a fantasy RPG like D&D to its kind of core elements while still retaining enough identity that it's legible, if that makes sense. And this is obviously inspired by various other like very straightforward RPGs, um, largely by the game Dread, and I wanted to. It's an exercise for myself to see if I can make something that's evocative and simple. Like that's the idea. It's really meant to be as simple as possible, and you can see this in the way in which the game manifests itself. You have these very limited set of skills and a single die typically to resolve any particular action. Enemy stat blocks are like 3 sentences, an ability, a couple numbers. And I wanted to keep this through line, simplicity and straightforwardness, through all of the game's components, not just the character creation, which we've talked about before. So today I figured we would talk about how that manifests in its large other component, the actual action of the game. The last couple times we've talked about how rats are made, what they look like, the fun in how they achieve their action. Now we get to talk about, I suppose the best word for it is like a loadout. In Rat Quest, before you rats go on a quest, you all get to receive a single item in preparation for your quest, and rats all have an inventory of a single item. This is meant to kind of evoke like one, how small their world really is. Like they have like a mouth and maybe a single paw that they can scamper around on, or like keep hold of something while they scamper around. And it's also meant to sort of force a level of tension in scarcity of choice and opportunity, because there is a real interesting, I think, gameplay loop that happens in any kind of game that has a sort of limited inventory, where that idea of, oh, is this useful now? Would it be useful later? Is this better than my current option? That's all very interesting calculus to me, and I wanted to have it be as bare bones and as straightforward as possible. So to that end, a single item is all a rat can carry, and those items are all meant to be fairly significant and powerful, albeit sometimes situational. And the fun in that system is how players might use their rat's particular ingenuity to engineer situations that are favorable to their loadout and to their stats. We talked about how rats can be defined by their size or their speed, but not their intelligence or their cunning. That's funny because one of the stats is literally called nose cunning. That relates more to like their ability to discern if there is poison nearby, which is a very important skill for a rat to have. But none of that has to do with how you are capable as a player of interfacing with the various items that you might either begin your quest with or retrieve over the course of a quest. Now you can see here that we've kind of divided out each of the items into categories. We have kind of mundane items that any rat might possess. For example, a little splinter of a piece of wood. I don't know. Where's my mouse? Can I get this? Yeah, right here. Let me actually... Should have done this in advance. That's on me. But hey, you know what? Let's find a nice color. Let's go for plain old white. I had a pen somewhere. Oh my god, I'm taking too long. So you can see how, again, with the goal of setting up evocative imagery that communicates the world and the scope of the world of the rats, all of these sort of lesser items are designed around that kind of idea. Obviously, the world of Rat Quest is grim and dark and full of peril. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called Rat Quest. So the items within are meant to be a sort of silly, campy version of how a rat might go on adventures. So, for example, we have a splinter, which is kind of a rat equivalent of a weapon. White is the wrong color for that, you know? But whatever. I imagine this to be some kind of like broken off piece of wood, like from a door or from a broom, or maybe just a straight up toothpick. And it functions as a kind of spear, allowing, when you're in combat, for your rat to more significantly harm the others that they encounter when you engage in rat violence. Similarly, a shield will protect you from that before said rat violence. Both of those items are meant to be like the categories of mundane magic and meals correspond to not only like the sort of general category that these items occupy, but also what you might expect their longevity to be, both in terms of like how preserved they are on your person or in your inventory, and also how much use you might be able to get out of them. For example, both a splinter and a shield, your offense and your defense, as it were, are likely to get you pretty far. But say, for example, you engage in this rat violence, and you're a fairly large rat, but the enemy rat is of a comparable size, shall we say, two rat berserkers going at it on the coarse cobbles of the kitchen floor. Both of you armed with little toothpick spears. It's so silly. Because there's still risk involved, right? A spear will, if you successfully hit the other rat, deal additional damage. That just works, right? That is like straight up, you can expect it to do a particular thing. That is the function of a mundane item. But baked in there is that core risk of what if you mess up. As we've talked about, RatQuest has a stratified success system, and if you were to critically fail, which is possible, you may break your splinter. Now, you're a big rat, the splinter is just adding to your damage. It's not the end of the world if you lose your weapon. You still have natural weapons, your fangs, your little rat teeth, and your little rat paws. So you're not out of luck. It's just like odd drat. Same with the shield, right? You could use it to block damage. You could get it to like reduce things, but every time you risk it for the biscuit, and use your shield to block some incoming damage, like that is a risk, and you will probably lose it. Well, not probably, but there's a good chance. And then you have something like twine, which is a little less straightforward, as the object implies. It's what might you, as a little rat, use a bunch of twine for? Well, you might climb with it. You might tie something to it. You might tie another rat up. You see how there are these loosenesses. There's this looseness to how the items are meant to work, and again, the function is, and the design is, to make them as basic as possible so that they inspire creativity. Um, that's kind of mundane items. Obviously, this is not the full list. This is just sort of what I could draft up in the time that I had to take off with moving and things. Um, Sorry about that to my loyal subscriber army. I'm sorry that I didn't upload last week. I know you were all frothing at the mouth over that. But then let's move on to something which is similarly straightforward, but a little bit more, possibly exciting. Cheese. Every little rat loves a little bit of cheese. Uh, don't any biologists out there, don't quote me on that. But these are kind of, and we have an interesting little ranking here, little smorgasbord of items. Meals are very much just like your restorative items. Like, they are consumables. They don't necessarily all do the same thing, but they are meant to, like, function as a kind of currency and not currency. Basically, if you're a little rat and you go on a long quest, you're going to need to eat at some point. And if you're going to need to eat, you're going to want a seed. Now, I don't want this to be sort of a no-brainer, no-choice, anti-fun mechanic, right? Where, like, every rat only gets one thing, and then if you're going on a multi-day trek, oh no, you're screwed. The seed, being like the most basic option, is enough to feed an entire party of rats for a single day. It's not a great meal, but it'll get you by. And then from there we upgrade to cheese, which is obviously more substantial and might get you by for a couple days. But that's not the only function of a consumable item. There's also the very real threat that as you encounter, say you're that big rat, you fought the other rat, you broke your splinter, but you did successfully defeat the rat. In so doing, considering you messed up the first time you tried to attack it, you received an injury of yourself, and now you are a little bit physically weaker than you used to be. That's where something like a good leaf or some kind of, like, healing item might come into play, where it's meant to recover injuries more rapidly than you are expecting to. Rats all recover one injury every time they rest, but over the course of a quest, you might suffer 6 injuries. Like, you will have your resources depleted, and your resources are your rat body and your rat mind, and maybe even your rat soul. That was stupid. But you get the idea, right? Something like a good meal might be able to restore something faster than you otherwise would be able to. And then we kind of move on to the most, this is, I guess, the best example. This is a sort of like conventional fantasy RPG, is like, this might be what you consider treasure. In reality, it's more like situational, advantageous items that I won't go into with as much detail. But for example, let's look at the coin, right? So within the world of RatQuest, there are several different types of rat. You have, like, the kitchen clans, who are a little bit more how you might imagine a fantasy warrior culture of rats, would live. They live in the most volatile and potentially most rich, resource rich part of the ruin with all the old food, and they're always fighting over it. Um, these are people or these are rats who are more likely to use weapons and things like that, but they aren't the only rats that live in the ruin. There are other rat factions, I suppose, that trade and do business and have entirely different kinds of culture. Um, and some of them are quite dangerous, and some of them are quite mystical. A coin is an old human relic that has no purpose to many of the rats in the ruin, except for the bloody ones, who are a very scary kind of rat that live in the old dungeon. And well, you might imagine what they eat or uh, engage in with their name, but these particular rats do trade in human currency, which is very curious and very strange. So from that kind of example, we might imagine how these kinds of items or this category of item would be useful. Um, Again, it's not going to be something that you encounter an enemy rat. He doesn't care. You know, they don't care that you have a coin. But you come up against some big hulking dungeon rat who's albino and has blood seeping off its fur, and you have a coin. Well, who, buddy? That's good for you. Less good for the rats who don't have a coin. That's the kind of core conceit, right? And again, nothing about these items is so definite. Like, I will not be stipulating all the things that a splinter can do, simply what it does in a particular context. The fun is how players will take that and use that combined with their attributes, and the tension of ingenuity and scarcity, and like I said, engineer situations that are advantageous to them. Um, as a sort of like big rat who makes all the rules game master situation, there's going to be a level of adjudication that comes with it. But I think, like, generally speaking, it's best principle to engage with the fiction first. And I think the core idea is, like, with these items having a very set, definite idea of their ability, if the players come up with a situation where that ability is bent a little bit but still, like, very conceivable, I just think it should work, right? Like, I think that's a very, very good. Um, it's fun, I think that's you getting lost in the verbosity of it, but straight up, I think that's what it is. It's fun. Um, Obviously, as I said, a quest is full of risk. Sometimes you'll have to roll a test to see if an item works in the way that you want it to. But each rat only gets one. And is it fun to say one is fun? I don't know. Um, uh, we're probably gonna talk about enemies next time, and we're getting pretty close to, like, sort of all the mechanical extents of Rat Quest coming to a close. I don't know how much more I will do devlogs for, considering this is kind of it, right? You have rats, their abilities, their items, their enemies. I suppose we could talk about the factions of Rat Quest and the world and the lore, but I don't know if I can make a 20-30 minute video on that. I mean, I could, but I don't know how interesting it would be. So next time, I think we'll talk about enemies and what a given scenario might look like in Rat Quest. Yeah, I think that's about it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.